Pull up,
Frank,
headshot,
Frank,
sit down,
Frank.
stand up.
What's up everyone, my name is AAA, and when I say Overwatch clone, you say, Paladins, probably. Even though that's a little unfair. I mean, they were both in development at the same time, and they aren't as similar as some people think. But the point is, once Overwatch released last year, it gained a massive following, and people have been pointing out a whole ton of hero shooters and pegging them as Overwatch clones. True, some of them actually are. There's one game that even shamelessly ripped off the characters and powers so much that some people were legitimately confused because they thought they were playing Overwatch. But really, a lot of the time, I've noticed that any sort of hero shooter nowadays comes with that Overwatch clone tag. That's a little strange considering the hero shooter genre has been around for a long while, and you could even make the case for Overwatch copying something like Team Fortress 2 if you wanted. There are some things in hero shooters that are just part of the genre, like the medic character. If people are going to get mad at a game for having a medic character just like Overwatch, they might as well get mad at Resident Evil 7 because it allows you to zoom your camera to aim your gun just like Call of Duty. That's just a fundamental first-person shooter mechanic, so no one makes that claim, but for some reason I find with hero shooters, they're always on the losing end of this whole thing. Regardless, even though I'm not a fan of the term being used so liberally, I do have to admit that there are a bunch of games out there that are copying this successful formula. So it's time to put Boss Key Productions' new game Lawbreakers under a microscope and see if it's truly unique or just another Overwatch wannabe. Now, the last time we did this with Spider-Man and Batman, we looked at story, traversal, and a whole bunch of aspects of the gameplay. Here, since it's not really a single-player campaign, we're going to change it up a little bit. We'll be looking at visual style, gunplay mechanics, traversal and level design, characters, and powers. I won't be talking about the game modes because most multiplayer shooters and especially hero shooters have the same basic stuff, so I'll just overlook that. Since some of these categories are more hefty than others, I'll be giving different weights to all of them. Pretty much I'll assign a grade for each category. Visual style will be graded from 0 to 15, as will traversal and level design. Powers and gunplay mechanics will be out of 20 each, and the characters will be out of 30. Remember, the grading system has nothing to do with what's better, just what is more similar and what is different. And the more points you have, the more of a copy you are. We'll get a certain mark out of 100 for these, and if you haven't seen my older video, Under the Influence has 5 levels of imitation. Level 1 is sober. That's if the point range is between 1 and 20, and it means that there's no real imitation going on. Level 2 is kinda tipsy from 20 to 40 points. Level 3 is hitting on that pretty girl over there. Level 4 is, yeah, of course I could do a backflip, dude. And at this point, it's extremely obvious that the game is basically ripping off the other. And finally, we have the absolute shameless rip-off level that is wasted. Now that we know the scoring system, let's get into how big of a perpetrator Lawbreakers is. The first category here is visual style, and honestly I find the visual style is pretty significantly different here. Overwatch has a very cartoonish look from its environments to its character models. It's extremely colorful and definitely sells the style very well. It's pleasing to look at, and the characters do look and feel like ones you'd find in a cartoon, be they superheroes or supervillains. Lawbreakers takes a more realistic approach to things. Sure, it still has crazy powers and cool looking skins, but all the characters look like humans, and not in the Tracer looks like a cartoonish human kind of way, but like actual more realistic renditions of humans in video games. Even besides character models, the environments look pretty drastically different, with Overwatch again being cartoony and Lawbreakers looking more like a Destiny or perhaps a less hell-crazed version of Doom. I think it's fair to say that visually something like Paladins is more likely to seem like a direct parallel, but Lawbreakers doesn't have that kind of feeling in the look alone. If anything, I'd say it heavily resembles Destiny or Black Ops 3 with some of the futuristic looking things that are half fantastical, half real, and overall futuristic. Lawbreakers looks like it's set on Earth 100 years from now, while Overwatch looks like it's in a completely different dimension. So honestly, I think visually this thing doesn't get any points, which, reminder, is a good thing. So Lawbreakers is starting off strong by receiving no points in visual style and already cementing itself as somewhat different. In fact, the style makes it unique among the genre as a whole, as Paladins and even Team Fortress 2 decided to take the cartoonish route, and I personally really enjoy this. Traversal and level design is up next, and again we have a fairly distinct feeling to Lawbreakers. In fact, here we get into why it's earned its name. It's called Lawbreakers because it breaks the laws of physics and allows you to seriously mess with gravity. Overwatch is highly mobile, and some of the characters are good at getting in the air really high or staying there for a while, but the gravity in that game feels very Earth-like, which is kinda funny considering it was the un-Earth-like game in our last category. Most of the action takes place on the ground or when you're standing on a building, but Lawbreakers completely throws that out the window. Jumping up to crazy heights and having fights in midair is a huge thing that happens while playing this game. You move around in the air so often, and that's how you get around and dodge attacks among many other things. The assassin character also showed off his lasso grapple thing that it uses to get around at times, which is something that also gets you really high up in the air. It's not all in 0G, that's only in some spaces, so sometimes you will be slightly more grounded. On ground, the movement feels a little bit more like Overwatch, with its occasional dashes and pullbacks and highly mobile stuff, but the aerial aspect is a huge element in the game which really sets it apart. This also has a big impact on level design as it's extremely vertical along with the typical horizontal stuff. While with Overwatch you get some higher points, Lawbreakers feels like it's just as high as it is wide and offers a whole new dimension in that sense. I guess you can make some comparisons when boots are on the ground, but in general there's not much obvious similarity here either, so I'll give it a 3 out of 15. Next up on our list is gunplay mechanics, and this is where I think a lot of people might think it draws comparisons, but you'd be surprised. First of all, there's no stunning mechanic, which, depending on which players are on the field, can happen pretty often in Overwatch. The developers for Lawbreakers thought it was a serious detriment to the mobility and just found it irritating and hopeless, and they decided to keep it out of this game. While I believe some attacks actually do affect mobility a little bit, full-on stunning doesn't exist in this game. There are also no counters, since with Overwatch there are some matchups that no matter how hard you try, there is no chance you'll win. With Lawbreakers, no matter who you are and who you're facing, you'll have at least some chance. This isn't from me personally since I haven't had the chance to play the game, but from the devs and from the people that I know that have played it, this point came up pretty often. Also, with the addition of being able to break gravity comes the problem of having to deal with enemies both in the air and on the ground. This adds some basic changes to gunplay and more sporadic and drastic moves being made by the person you're attacking, and even yourself, and it tweaks how you're supposed to aim and take down enemies. But it also means some projectile-based characters will have a better time on the ground, matching up with enemies that send out lower level attacks, but these lower level attack characters have a much bigger advantage in the air because it's a lot easier to aim consistently. Here again we see the effects of this new dimension of gameplay and how characters thrive in different conditions, which is definitely something that happens in Overwatch, but for different reasons. Finally, every single character in Lawbreakers is skill-based, and when I say skill-based I mean skillful first-person shooting ability. Characters in Overwatch like Mercy require mental skills of knowing where to go and what to do, but you can play this character easily while also being like the worst first-person shooter player in existence. Winston is also a character that's all about knowing when to go in, when to leave, how to play certain situations, etc. And that requires a lot of skill, but the actual shooting people isn't all that difficult. You'll find here that Lawbreakers is a lot more like Destiny or Call of Duty, albeit more diversive, in the fact that characters have different moves and perhaps different firearms, but at the end of the day, you need to be fundamentally good at shooting people. Look, this is a first-person shooter and it's a hero shooter, so yeah, some of the gunplay will feel familiar, but that's just because there's only so many changes you can make to how gunplay actually feels. Instead, you can make changes on how things are balanced, where certain characters have advantages, and how to shake things up around the core mechanic of pointing and shooting things, and Lawbreakers does that extremely well. Some similarities are bound to be here, but overall it does a great job at distinguishing itself. 2 out of 20. Okay, so far we're sitting at a 5 out of 50, which is crazy low. However, we still have to address the two things that dictate what make most hero shooters either a copy or a fully distinct property, and those are powers and characters. So let's see how Lawbreakers stacks up there. I'll be talking about characters first since it'll lead into our final category, and Lawbreakers is a little strange in this department because it has 18 characters, but also it kinda only has 9. Before I explain that, first of all, a quick rundown of the characters in Overwatch. They're split up into 4 categories, those being offense, defense, support, and tank. Offense has 8 characters now with Doomfist, and while they all have the same strength, which is, offense, they all have different loadouts, abilities, health, etc., and that makes them all distinct while still trying to accomplish the same basic thing. The same can be said with the other 3 categories, with defense housing 6 characters, support with 5, and tank with 6. It would probably take an entire video on its own to actually fully talk about every character and their individual feel and personality, so instead of getting crazy in depth explaining them, let's just compare them to some classes in Lawbreakers. Now, I haven't been able to see all the Lawbreakers characters in action, but according to the Lawbreakers homepage, there are 8 classes of heroes with 2 characters each. But both characters have the exact same loadouts and abilities. The only difference is that one is Team Law and the other is Team Breakers. It's essentially a skin slapped onto the same character, so truth be told, there are only 8 real options here. Some of those options can be easily linked to Overwatch characters. The Titan and even the Vanguard classes are very tank-like in nature, and while they have different abilities from one another that make them feel distinct, that can be said for all the Overwatch characters also. Battle Medic is obviously like support, and Gunslingers and Juggernauts can be linked to certain offensive players. Unfortunately, in the alpha footage that I saw that was readily available, it featured only Titans, Vanguards, Enforcers, and Assassins, and other classes have pretty limited explanations on their main site, but I'll try my best with what I've got. There are a couple characters that seem really similar. For example, what I read and saw from the Juggernaut class seems eerily similar to another character that even has a similar name in Overwatch, but in general the characters are more hero shooter staples than direct Overwatch clones. This is the one thing I wish Lawbreakers did better. The characters feel uninspired and there's only 8 of them. There's that many characters in just the offensive class of Overwatch. Lawbreakers doesn't do much original work here, but I don't think it's directly stealing much from Overwatch. There are a couple characters that draw some comparisons, but I'd maybe liken them more to something like TF2 than Overwatch. It's almost a testament to Overwatch that their characters can feel so unique and different that even when Lawbreakers is being fairly by the book with their stuff, we can't find too many Overwatch comparisons, but I still think it deserves a good 10 out of 30 here. If we were looking at this as a copy of hero shooters in general, it would probably receive something a lot higher, but as it stands, Overwatch thrives through its fairly unique characters, and it gets to a point where Lawbreakers being unoriginal in this department actually means it garners less influence from Overwatch. It's a weird reverse, but that's kind of how it goes. Our final category is powers, and there are a few things to point out here. First, some abilities are really cool and native to the type of unique gameplay that Lawbreakers brings, like how the Vanguard can turn certain areas into 0G spaces, or the Enforcer can speed up those around him that are on his team for a short period of time. These kind of powers help with both mobility and verticality, and it can really change up dynamics. In terms of ultras, yes, you do have them here, but they aren't complete enemy obliterators that you can find often in Overwatch, when you're just able to unleash a crazy powerful attack that messes up everyone in the blast range. Ultras here do a lot of damage, but in the words of the developers, are not overpowered. They're a little weaker, and that makes them a little bit less of a crutch at times. One such ability is smashing into the ground and also leaving a zero gravity field for enemies, which can do serious damage but usually isn't an insta-kill, and a lot of the time these ultras are a bit easier to dodge than what you get in Overwatch. The Assassin has one of my favorite abilities and probably also makes it super irritating to fight them, where their ultra allows them to see through walls and regenerate health every time they kill someone.